Can you give me a prediction for when I'm talking to you this time, 2027? Where will Harry and Meghan be?
Stripped of their titles.
Meghan Markle is threatening to sue the British royal family and Prince William if her titles are removed.
Harry could be coming back to be a working member.
That's just conspiratorial crap.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer.
It's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. These two are grifters who are all about the money, who had the biggest opportunity in the world to turn around other people's lives, and they do not give a damn.
Last October, the king made a move involving his own brother, and it sent a clear message. Andrew lost the use of the word prince, and the Duke of York title went with it. Royal Lodge was also taken off the table, and after all of that, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor is still sitting 8th in line to the British throne. It's a striking reminder of how much can change on paper, even when the overall succession order stays the same.
They're basically manipulating their position for their own personal gain. I think this is a very serious moment for the monarchy, actually. I think, far more than Andrew or anything else, these are the people that are likely to really damage it.
Read that twice, because it really stands out. The man they made an example of, the one who was taken down in a single afternoon, is still standing in line for the crown, according to the discussion. Nobody pushed him down a spot, and not one of those changes touched his place in the succession.
Is there any world in which Harry and Meghan walk back into England and the royal family and take up duties, in your mind?
Disneyland, perhaps. No, I don't think there is. I think it's gone too far. I think Charles is keen to have a rapprochement with Harry before he dies, and I think Harry's keen on that too. But I think the relationship between William and Harry is just...
Now, every video you have watched this month has been selling you that same ending for Harry and Meghan. Stripped by 2027, not if, but when, they tell you. It has become a countdown, and I have even used versions of that line on this channel myself, so this is not about pointing fingers. But almost nobody has stopped to explain what that sentence actually changes in practice, and what it quietly leaves in place behind the scenes. That is where the conversation gets a lot more complicated, because the public reaction is not really about a title anymore, it is about what people think that title actually means in real life. Online, some viewers are treating it like a total reset, while others keep pointing out that taking away a style or a public role does not automatically change every legal or constitutional detail behind it. And that gap is exactly why the speculation keeps spreading. People see a headline that sounds final, then assume the whole story is finished, when in reality there may still be a lot happening below the surface. So the discussion around Harry and Meghan is not just about gossip, it is about the difference between what sounds dramatic and what actually changes on paper, which is why this debate keeps getting pulled back into the spotlight.
We knew this day was coming. We knew that he was going to want to leave and to have his life back. We knew that that freedom flight was nothing but a fraud of a flight that he was taking. And so now Harry has confirmed that, hey, I want to go back.
There are 2 locks on that door, and only one of them can be turned with a pen. The other takes an act of parliament plus the agreement of 14 other countries, and in 90 years it has only shifted once. That is the part a lot of people miss, because it shows how much harder the deeper change really is.
Meghan, this is historic. There has not been a crisis like this in 90 years.
Stick with this to the end, because you will see exactly what a King William could take from his brother on day one, what would likely require a much bigger constitutional debate, and the one thing that seems to survive all of it, the detail that could stay tied to Harry's passport even after the formal letterhead is gone.
The Virginia Giuffre book, Prince Andrew believed it was his birthright to have sex with me. It's a horrible, horrible quote. It shows just how entitled this man really was to these things.
Give the pen its credit, because it seemed to accomplish more in one afternoon last autumn than 6 years of public shouting ever appeared to manage. In October, Andrew was reportedly reduced, not by a vote, not by a trial, and not by years of courtroom drama, but by letters patent, the monarch's own formal instrument issued under the Great Seal. That document is understood to state that a man no longer holds the style and dignity of a prince, which is why the change carried so much weight in public discussion. And that is why people keep arguing over the difference between a headline and a legal reality. Once the public sees a royal title stripped away, it can feel like everything connected to that person has been erased, but the conversation online keeps circling back to the same point. The paperwork and the public image do not always move at the same speed. That is where the reaction gets so intense, because viewers are not just debating one royal figure, they are debating how much power the crown actually has to reshape a public identity. Some people read these moves as a complete break, while others say it is only the most visible part of a much bigger constitutional process. So the suspense is not just about what has already happened, it is about what can still shift later, and which parts of that royal status may continue to linger even after the formal changes are made.
Our next guest has a long history with the royal family. Piers Morgan has met Andrew, knows his ex-wife Fergie, and their daughter as well. He joins us now on the phone. Hey, Piers, did you ever think it would come to this?
Do you know, I was beginning to fear it might, but when it actually happens, it is an absolute bombshell. I mean, to put this into context, there has been no member of the royal family arrested in my lifetime. I'm 60 years old.
And once the ink dried, that was the end of it. In the space of one working day, he went from His Royal Highness to plain Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Then came the move off Royal Lodge, out of the Grand House and onto the Sandringham estate, a setting so secluded that the nearest neighbors might as well be pheasants.
Residents in Sandringham in Norfolk aren't happy. That's where Andrew will be moving, of course. They said yesterday, we don't want him here either. He is a horrible man. It is hard to know where you put Andrew.
That really was a turning point, and there is no point pretending otherwise. For years, the usual view was that the machinery to do this neatly simply was not there. Andrew changed that thinking in a single morning, according to online discussion. Before long, every royal watcher who had insisted it could never happen was looking west and quietly starting the countdown. So yes, the pen is real, and when it is used, it can work fast.
It's now a matter of when, not if, he strips Prince Harry and Meghan Markle of their royal titles.
If the pen is that easy to use, and the king has had that same pen in hand for 3 years, then why has it never once been used on his own son? That is the part people keep circling back to. And that question is exactly why the conversation keeps sticking around online. Some viewers say the issue is not just about one royal figure, it is about what the palace can do when it wants to draw a hard line, and what it chooses not to do when the situation gets more personal. That is why every new development gets picked apart so closely, because people are not only watching the titles and residences, they are watching the larger message behind them. To some, the changes look decisive. To others, the fact that certain parts of the royal picture still linger makes the whole thing feel unfinished, or at least more complicated than the headlines suggest. So the debate keeps circling back to the same uneasy point. If one set of changes could happen so quickly, then what does that say about the rest of the story?
I did think it would happen. If Harry and Meghan are watching, they should be incredibly concerned, because if it's this simple to take away Prince Andrew's titles, one day it could be this easy to take away Harry and Meghan's titles.
Everyone seems to reach for a character sketch. Some say he is soft, not in the best health, and naturally inclined to delay decisions, always putting things off. That is the easy answer, and we will come back to it, because the more honest answer may be a lot more troubling. The pen does not reach the one thing that matters most in this story. And Harry, who has been called plenty of things but never careless about his own position, appears to understand that very clearly.
My sources are saying that William no longer recognizes his brother. He basically says he doesn't know who this kid is. Harry has become petulant. He's become vengeful. He's very angry at all times. And William's just kind of like, hey, who the heck are you? And yes, they do blame Meghan.
The line of succession is not something a royal can simply claim or adjust on a whim. It is set out in law, built into the Act of Settlement and the Succession to the Crown Act, and a monarch cannot just change it the way someone edits a note on a page. If a person is going to be removed from that line, it takes primary legislation, meaning an act of parliament. That is where things get really complicated, and it is the part that seems to be missing from so many of these videos.
They are a danger, honestly. Take this lesson from what Fergie and Andrew have done over the past 3 decades and do not let history repeat.
By convention, and as set out in the preamble to the Statute of Westminster, any change to the succession would also need the approval of every other country where the king serves as head of state. That means 14 separate realms, including Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Jamaica, and Papua New Guinea, each with its own parliament, its own political climate, and its own priorities. In practical terms, that leaves open a very real question about whether any of them would want to spend weeks of legislative time on a dispute tied to the British royal family. And that is exactly why the reaction online refuses to die down. People are not just debating the rules in a dry, legal sense, they are watching for any sign of whether the system can actually move when the pressure gets high. For some, the recent changes looked like a firm line in the sand. For others, they only made the bigger question more visible, because the parts still left unresolved now stand out even more. That is where the tension sits. If one issue could be handled with this much force, then viewers naturally start wondering why the rest feels so much slower, so much more complicated, and so much easier to push aside. And once that thought takes hold, every new headline gets read through the same lens, not as a single update, but as a clue about how far the palace is willing to go when the stakes are no longer simple.
Charles needs to wake up, because what he's also doing, of course, is damning William to having his younger brother running a rival royal court in the United Kingdom. Because what else does he have to do, Lauren? That's the other issue here. Harry has nothing going for him in America. He has no work over there. He has no meaningful charity over there. His marriage is completely miserable. He is totally miserable. So unfortunately, this security decision means we will be seeing a hell of a lot of Harry in the United Kingdom. That is bad news for Prince William, who is trying to protect the monarchy.
We have already seen how demanding that kind of change can be. When the rules were modernized in 2013 so a firstborn daughter could inherit, it required the Perth Agreement, years of coordination, and separate legislation moving through one parliament after another. And that was for a reform most people actually supported. The last time someone was truly removed from the line of succession was back in 1936, with Edward V. through the Abdication Act, which also took the descendants who would have followed him out of the line. That happened about 90 years ago, and only once, which is exactly how we end up with the spectacle unfolding now, because this is not the kind of thing that happens quickly or without major political effort.
This scandal has been hiding in plain sight for 15 years. I was working at Murdoch's former newspaper, The News of the World, in a senior position in 2011. We revealed those pictures, do you remember, of Epstein and Andrew in Central Park in New York.
And Andrew went to see him and stayed with him, right? At his New York
with royal protection
townhouse.
officers. Do you see what I mean? This is where
After
the
the
deep
fact,
state is pulled into this.
The British government has said it will consider legislation to remove Andrew from the list, and once those words landed, constitutional lawyers were already pointing to the same issues: 14 parliaments, the diplomatic strain, and the possibility that the whole effort could end up being more symbolic than practical. That is where things stand for a man who, in public reaction, has faced overwhelming criticism across the country.
Because why have the police spent 15 years choosing not to investigate Andrew? Because they probably knew. What did Charles know? What files are included at Buckingham Palace? We're literally in unprecedented territory, Meghan.
Now picture that same convoy of legislation moving through 14 countries, all pointed at a father of two, whose main public controversy, at least in the way people talk about it online, is being widely unpopular. Honestly, the math just does not seem to work, and anyone talking up a quick 2027 fix has not really explained how it would happen. That is why this whole debate keeps getting pulled back into the spotlight. Online, people are not just reacting to one name or one title change, they are using it as a test case for how the wider system works when the pressure gets real. Some viewers see a rare example of the rules actually being enforced, while others argue it only shows how messy and slow the process becomes once the conversation moves beyond headlines. And that gap matters, because every new discussion now seems to invite the same follow-up question: if one change can move this far, what happens when the next one is even more complicated? That is the part keeping the reaction alive, not certainty, but uncertainty, and the sense that the bigger picture is still unsettled. So instead of fading out, the conversation keeps building, with each new wave of commentary adding more weight to a situation that already feels hard to pin down.
Terrible news for Harry and Meghan here is that William can now take away everything, their titles, without an act of parliament.
Well, let's try the part that nobody has really laid out cleanly. Put the whole question on the table and separate what a King William could change on day one from what he simply could not. First up, the paperwork. The princely style belongs in that column. Harry was born as His Royal Highness Prince Henry of Wales, and that title traces back to a 1917 royal document signed by George V. In other words, what one set of letters patent granted, another set could potentially take away. That is the basic legal point people keep circling around, even as the wider debate remains heavily discussed and anything but simple.
Harry needs to leave. The longer he stays, the worse it's going to get. They're not going to get to where they want to be, and it's just disaster for them. And also, I believe children in between all of this, they're the ones who are going to pay the bigger price for all of this later in life.
The same goes for the HRH style, which the couple had already agreed to stop using back in 2020 anyway. So that part would be gone before lunch, just like it was for his uncle. But column 2 is the difficult one, the Duke of Sussex title. This is where a lot of commentators seem to wave it off and move on, but that is not really the full picture. A dukedom is not just a style, it is a peerage, and a peerage is often described in legal discussions as carrying property-like status in law. According to the long-standing legal framework people keep pointing to, there is only one statutory route for removing it, the Titles Deprivation Act, and that was written in 1917 for enemy peers during wartime.
I mean, as we revealed earlier in the week, he has now hired one of the country's most experienced crisis management PRs to work within his team at Kensington Palace day to day, because it shows you what he's expecting. He is expecting Prince Harry and Meghan Markle to set up a rival royal court, and thank God, actually, that he is preparing to fight fire with fire, because he knows that the future of the British royal family is at stake. And that's why I'm so disgusted, and I'm going to be honest with Charles and with the British government, because they should have just rejected Harry's security demands. They are ludicrous demands. He was always warned of the consequences.
The government raised questions about last November, and there has been no indication at all that it plans to change that. So this dukedom is not something that can simply be removed with a signature. It would take Parliament stepping in and passing legislation to strip a man of his peerage, and that is the kind of move that has not been seriously tried in over a century. And here is the wrinkle that should have been getting more attention. Meghan does not hold a title of her own. That is where the conversation gets even more complicated, because once you move past the titles themselves, the ripple effect starts reaching into the whole family structure. Online discussions have been zeroing in on that detail, since it suggests this is not just about one person's style or status, but about how the rules would play out around the people connected to him. And that is exactly why the reaction keeps spreading. Some commenters see it as a clean legal distinction, while others think it opens the door to a much wider debate about what can actually change through custom, consent, or parliament. So the story keeps sitting in that uneasy space between tradition and authority, with people watching closely for what could shift next, and what still seems firmly out of reach. She is the Duchess of Sussex only because of her marriage to that dukedom, and that puts her in column 2, the one that would need an act of parliament to change. So the person many online critics focus on would, in legal terms, be the one protected by the toughest lock in the whole setup. Even if Harry's princely style were removed tomorrow, she would still remain, in law, the Duchess of Sussex.
Numerous massive crises of confidence for Harry, because he realizes, holy shit, this is what I'm facing.
Isn't that revealing? In this setup, the palace could remove the prince title much more easily than it could ever affect the duchess title. Then there is column 3, the part that appears untouchable, the line of succession. Harry is 5th, his son is 6th, and his daughter is 7th. No letters patent changes any of those 3 positions by even one spot. Those places sit beyond the reach of a single signature, outlasting every pen stroke, every heated headline, and every countdown video on this site.
I believe that Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet need to be stripped and removed from the line of succession.
King William could remove the styles from all 3 of them tomorrow, and under the law, all 3 would still remain in line for his own throne. That is the part people keep overlooking. Now place those 3 columns next to the possibility that keeps getting floated, the idea that they could be stripped of their titles by 2027. At its absolute most, that language only points to column 1, and that is where the real limitation becomes impossible to ignore. That is why so many people online keep pushing back on the louder version of this story, because once the details are laid out side by side, the gap between public chatter and legal reality becomes a lot harder to ignore. What sounds simple in a headline can look very different when you separate a courtesy title from a legal one and then put that beside the line of succession. And that is where the debate keeps getting sharper. Some viewers are treating the whole thing as a question of optics and control, while others are pointing out that the most talked about changes may only affect the surface layer, not the deeper structure underneath. So the conversation keeps circling the same pressure point: what can be adjusted by decision, what would need formal action, and what remains in place no matter how loud the public reaction gets.
One bill, and it would deal with Meghan and Harry, but also critically, Pete Diner, it would deal with Archie and Lily too.
The words, just the letterhead and the small bit printed on the envelope, that's all it really comes down to. You could not make this stuff up. The punishment so many people online are cheering for turns out to be the one part of the whole situation a man could get through in an afternoon.
Give us back the Duchess of Sussex title. She wants to have the associations of the royal family, and she wants to profit off that, you know, with her brand and all of her marketing things that have Duchess of Sussex, but she doesn't want to do the work, and this is the issue.
Now I know exactly what a lot of people are thinking, and honestly, it makes sense to question it. This has been promised year after year since the Sussexes stepped back. Every summer, somebody seems to attach a new date to the story, and then every summer, that date quietly slips off the calendar without much follow-up. So the big question is simple: why should anyone take this latest version at face value now?
The truth is, they need photos in Buckingham Palace or with royal members of the family, or as you said, feeding kids or whatever, because that's all they've got left to tout. Because the United States has had enough, the United Kingdom has had enough, Australia's had enough, everybody's had enough.
These predictions do not fall apart because there is no will inside that family. They fall apart because the thing being promised and the thing actually possible were never the same. In other words, people keep expecting total erasure when the reality is much narrower than that. The public has basically been sold the idea of Harry being deleted, scrubbed from the website, pushed out of the family, removed from the line, gone. But that is the version that keeps spreading online, not necessarily the legal reality behind it. That difference is exactly why the online backlash keeps missing the mark. A lot of people are reacting to the headline version, but the more practical side of the story is about process, boundaries, and what can actually be changed without rewriting everything around it. Once you separate the emotional reaction from the formal rules, the whole conversation looks a lot less dramatic, even if the internet is still treating it like a total wipeout. And that is where the frustration keeps building. Some commenters want the most severe outcome possible, while others are pointing out that public expectations are running ahead of what the system can support. So the debate keeps splitting in two. One side focused on punishment and optics, the other side focused on what is real, what is symbolic, and what only looks bigger when it gets repeated online.
And he constantly is living this life of demanding extra because he's Prince Harry. Bro, when you left the royal family, you became some random dude. Keep it honest. Who was Prince Harry?
So many people, they want all the privileges. They want all of the honors. They want all the plaudits, but they don't want to do anything.
The machine does not really erase anyone. It subtracts. It can strip the words from a man and still leave every structural piece exactly where it was. So when that day finally comes, and some people do expect it to come, the result may be a lot less dramatic than the online chatter suggests. The anticlimax could be the biggest surprise of all. There would likely be a brief palace notice, a website update, and maybe 2 lines in the court circular. He would still be Henry Mountbatten Windsor, or something very close to that, and she would appear as Miss Markle on the paperwork.
I think the palace and the machinery of the monarchy needs to take Harry and Meghan more seriously and make sure that Harry and Meghan's antics don't impact the future of the crown.
There may be one very polished afternoon of celebration, plenty of cake and all the formal ceremony that comes with it, but the next morning he would still be 5th in line to the British throne. That is exactly why this story never lands the way people expect it to. A lot of online chatter keeps suggesting a dramatic ending, while the rules keep producing something much smaller, usually just a change of name and title. Funny how none of the people pushing the countdown ever seem eager to mention the small print.
King Charles refuses to end Prince Harry's dream of a half-in, half-out return to royal life.
Which brings us to the man holding that pen right now, and to the most uncomfortable question in this whole saga. Charles has had that instrument on his desk since the day he acceded, and he used it on his brother after years of pressure, as public discussion has repeatedly noted. But when it comes to his son, nothing has followed. No notice, no warning, not even a sharper line in a palace statement. His son accused the family of racism on television, wrote the book, made the documentary, took on the institution in court, and lost. And yet, the Styles still sit exactly where they always sat. That is why the whole conversation keeps circling back to perception versus procedure, because online people tend to treat every public silence like a hidden answer. But in reality, the gap between what viewers expect and what can actually happen inside a royal framework is doing most of the heavy lifting here. It is not that the reaction is coming out of nowhere, it is that the reaction keeps outrunning the rules. And once that happens, every small detail starts to look loaded. A title, a style, a line in a statement, even what is left untouched. All of it gets read as a signal. That is why this story has stayed so sticky in public discussion, because the dispute is not only about one person, it is about what people think accountability should look like when the institution moves carefully and the internet wants instant answers. So the tension keeps building, not because the facts are changing every hour, but because the commentary keeps pushing the story into bigger and bigger territory.
Let's not forget the Oprah performance.
Oh, yeah.
What?
They
What?
did what? These people?
How dark your baby was going
It was
to be?
ridiculous.
Now, the softer read is that this is a father who simply cannot bring himself to cut off his youngest boy. The harsher read, and the one I keep coming back to, is that he may have quietly decided this was somebody else's problem. And if that sounds familiar, it should. The late Queen carried the Andrew question for most of a decade, and it was never really settled during her lifetime. It then landed fully on her son's desk the moment he became king, and Charles ended up spending 3 years of a relatively short reign cleaning up a mess he had not created. That is part of why the debate around duty, patience, and timing has stayed so intense.
I think that King Charles's meeting with Prince Harry ultimately, and I understand a man living with cancer, grandchildren, I get it, but I think ultimately it makes him look weak. And a lot of people are disappointed that Meghan gets to do a victory lap.
Now look at what he is said to be doing with his own son. He reportedly sat with Harry at Highgrove for an hour, and then nothing changed. A number of serious voices have said the real reckoning would come with the next reign, and that next reign belongs to William, whose stance toward his brother has been described in public commentary, from Angela Levin to the Sunday Times, as settled, cold, and unforgiving.
That's the strength we're looking for in a future monarch. You know, standing by your principles, standing by your wife and your and protecting your family's peace, which is ultimately what he's doing, and keeping a distance between him and Prince Harry.
So the pattern seems to repeat one generation later. The parent leaves the toughest decision in the family unresolved, then passes the pressure to the child who eventually inherits the desk. And for some viewers, that makes the optics look oddly convenient. Almost as if the goal is to be remembered as the leader who never formally turned away from his son, while quietly setting up the heir to make that call instead. That is the part people keep coming back to, and it is the part that should stay with you. And that is exactly why the public keeps leaning so hard into the story, because when a family at that level avoids a direct line, people start reading the silence as a decision. In online discussions, that silence is never seen as empty, it is treated like a message, and sometimes a very deliberate one. That is where the frustration comes from, since viewers are not just reacting to one title or one meeting, they are reacting to the feeling that the hardest questions keep getting postponed until someone else has to deal with them. So the conversation stops being about one single fallout and starts turning into a wider test of responsibility, image, and succession. Supporters may argue that caution is simply how these matters are handled, while critics say the delay only makes the optics harder to ignore. Either way, the same pattern keeps standing out. The difficult choice gets pushed down the line, and the pressure lands on the next person in place. That is why the reaction has not faded, because people are not only watching what was done, they are watching who may be left to finish the job later.
She is, anybody and everybody will tell you, the most demanding, narcissistic pain in the arse that there probably has ever been in royal circles.
William is not stepping into a simple role here. He is inheriting a situation where, in public discussion, he may be able to sideline a brother, but not erase him, and that brother's 2 young children remain 6th and 7th in line to William's own crown, in a sequence that would reportedly take 14 parliaments to reshape. The titles. Yes, he takes those. Every last one of them.
Whatever they do, whatever they say, whatever they promise, whatever they let us down on, they will never be held in the same esteem, not within an inch of the same esteem as Kate and William.
Then he would spend an entire reign dealing with a man in California who, on paper, is still in the line of succession, still able to be referred to as the king's brother, and still only one memorial service away from becoming relevant again. That is not a clean break at all. It is a splinter nobody can quite reach, and in public discussion, his father seems to be leaving that problem in his hands on purpose.
This guy's a threat to himself because, I mean, the entire saga of Prince Harry is quite depressing, really, because I remember when he was a bit of the nation's lad, he was happy, he was a bit happy-go-lucky and all that, and then he met that woman, and it all went downhill. Yeah, it's sad, really.
So where does all of this leave the countdown people keep talking about? The mechanism is real, the appetite is real, and the numbers seem to support it. A poll for The Times found 44% saying Harry should lose his title, compared with 32% who said he should keep it. And online discussions keep pointing to the precedent with his uncle's name attached to it. I do think the styles go, and many commentators expect it would happen under William rather than under his father, but it is worth going in with your eyes open. What is coming looks more like a subtraction than a full erasure. They would be taking away an HRH style that has not been used for 6 years, along with a princely style that traces back to a signature from 1917. And that is where the reaction starts to get even more intense. Because once people believe a title issue is only partial, they begin asking what really changes in the long run. In online discussion, that is the part that keeps the debate alive, the feeling that the public may see a headline shift, but not a full clean break. That gap between appearance and outcome is exactly what critics keep pointing to. Supporters may say these decisions have to move carefully, especially when family, history, and law are all tangled together. But commenters keep arguing that careful does not always look decisive, and decisive is what people want when a story has stayed in the spotlight for so long. So the focus turns again to the bigger picture. Who has to carry the pressure? Who gets protected by process? And who ends up holding the uncomfortable pieces once the headlines move on? That is why the conversation refuses to settle down. It is no longer just about one person or one title. It is about the message people think the institution is sending, and whether that message is clearer to insiders than it is to everyone watching from the outside.
The only reason he wants to come here, and everyone needs to realize this, is because his career has collapsed in the United States of America. Meghan Markle's dream of becoming a Hollywood billionaire in America has collapsed. It's over. The staff are leaving. The rats are abandoning this sinking ship.
And a dukedom could still be next, if Parliament can ever be persuaded to sit down and actually do the work. What no king can remove, not with a pen, not through a cabinet decision, and not without 14 countries agreeing, is that place in the line of succession. What stands out, according to online reactions, is that Harry seems to understand that very well. When he was recently asked what he does for a living, he described himself as a full-time dad, a veteran, and Prince of England. But Prince of England is not an official title, and has not been for centuries. Still, he reached for it anyway.
His performance on that podcast, talking about his grooming, was really, you might forgive him.
Or people shitting themselves on a highway. It's the worst thing I've ever seen, Jobbo. I'm not exaggerating.
41, man, if you want to be taken seriously, start being a bit serious. He was supposed to be on that. Whoever allowed him to go on there. I mean, I'm sure it's something he wants to do. But this laddish banter nonsense, and talking about your grooming and whether you're ginger or not. Frankly, who cares if you're ginger or not? Nobody, Harry, nobody.
That is a man who figured out a long time ago that the label is the real asset. Take the label away, and he becomes a private citizen in Montecito with a fading brand and a track record of legal disputes, which is exactly why some people believe they would go after it, and exactly why taking it alone may never feel like enough. So when that day comes, do you think Parliament should go all the way and legislate them out of the line of succession? Or is removing the styles punishment enough? Tell me what you think in the comments. I read every one. And if this story about titles, succession, and what really changes on paper grabbed you, hit like, subscribe, share, and comment so more people can weigh in on it. See you on the next one.